Convoy. There's a line out the door, made up of women and children. Inside the building, Dr. Finkenberg and Corpsman Squall stand at opposite ends of a folding table. We're at one of our house calls. It's supposed to remind the Iraqi people our mission objective has changed. Now that Saddam has been deposed, we're supposed to be helping the newly democratic nation get on its feet. Dr. Finkenberg and my younger self are here to offer medical care to the villagers. It's mainly kids, since only a female medic can touch the women. The men, unless they're very old or very young, are either busy fighting us, farming, or training to fight the ones fighting us, so they don't show up. Corpsman Squall is having difficulty getting the little girl next in line to come sit in the chair he set up for his patients. She reminds him of the kids he used to work with as a camp counselor, and he knows he has a quiver of tricks to pull from. She won't understand a word he says, so he decides to forfeit any verbose routine he might have and go straight for slapstick. He turns to my brother, who stands guard duty just outside the door. "Hey, Chris, can I get a hand?" Noticing the little girl's hesitation, the private first class quickly catches on to the idea. He gives a silly round of applause as he enters the building. "What's up, Doc?" "Say ah." Opening his mouth and sticking out his tongue, Chris does as he's instructed. "Ah!" The corpsman fans the air and pinches his nose. "Ugh!" Chris winks at Dr. Finkenberg. "Chilly MRE." Corpsman Squall says, "Please take a seat." Picking up the chair and looking around aimlessly, Chris asks, "Where should I take it?" Corpsman Squall gives his brother a loose finger slap and a Three Stooges eye poke, which Chris reacts to with comic precision. Placing the chair back on the ground and raising his voice to a falsetto, the corpsman says, "Come here!" He reaches out for the girl, and when she pulls away, the corpsman does his best curly, slapping his forehead with a frustrated Relishing in her surprise, he repeats the action, this time with Chris's cooperation. "Come here! Come here!" The private throws in a wise guy, eh?" By now, she's smiling, and this time, when the Squall brothers beckon her, she comes. Nodding at the doctor, Corpsman Squall says, "See? They understand American just fine." The doctor smirks. "You're a regular Patch Adams." "Meets Good Morning Vietnam," says Chris. The corpsman pretends to be offended, and here I thought I was a genie. The little girl is relatively healthy and well-fed, and knowing his limitations, that's pretty much all Corpsman Squall is trained to diagnose. My younger self scans the other children in line, saying, "I was hoping to see one particular boy come out." "You were?" Dr. Finkenberg asks, reacting as though he's being set up for a punchline. Voice growing soft, the corpsman removes all semblance of humor. "Someone I saw the last time I was here." Fred knows better than to push when the subject comes up, and he lets the corpsman continue when he's naturally inclined to do so. He was a street kid with a crippled arm. I didn't get a good look at it to see if it was the result of an injury or a birth defect. Was hoping you'd get the chance to examine him. "Well, if he's homeless, I doubt he'll turn up." The corpsman shows the little girl how he wants her to open her mouth. "Say ah." She gives Chris a quick look, smiling. After he gives another demonstration, she happily obliges. Chris laughs. "Well, I'll poke around outside. Maybe I can catch a glimpse of your buddy." Dr. Finkenberg studies Chris as he walks out into the courtyard. "How'd you know he'd be here?" Corpsman Squall looks outside, expecting to see the street kid. "Is he here?" "I mean, Chris, how did you know your brother would be deployed here?" With a conspiratorial tone, the corpsman replies, "I didn't." "You volunteered because you thought he might be?" Corpsman Squall shakes his head at the doctor as he sends the little girl back to her mother. Using the new translator's aid, he tells the woman, "Your daughter is in good health, but you might want to get those eyes looked at by a specialist." He smiles. They're far too bright and beautiful. The woman listens to the translator shyly as the little girl gives a final giggle. The next kid in line practically leaps into the chair, and Corpsman Squall looks at him with feigned surprise. With his best hip-hop intonation, he says, "Whoa there, Shody! Slow your roll!" Dr. Finkenberg finishes with his patient and refreshes his chair as well. You basically lucked into a situation that's almost impossible. You realize that, right? I guess so. I'm serious, Squall. If you were both Marines or both Navy, there's no way you'd be in the same province right now. Maybe. But then again, the Tillman brothers were both Rangers when... He stops himself, but his eyes, which shift to his brother, carry on the thought. From my chair, I watch the two men turn their focus back to their work, allowing the conversation to lull into silence. Captain Squall paces beside me, eyeing me like a hungry lion. As he passes, he wipes away the scene, bringing us back to the remote facility. Nicholas, who still lies prone in a cold puddle, asks me, "Who were the Tillman brothers?" Pat played football for the Arizona Cardinals, I say. Kevin played baseball with the Cleveland Indians. Both gave up lucrative deals to enlist. I clear my throat. They were in Afghanistan when Pat was killed in action. Captain Squall nods at me, knowing there is more.
Go on.
Seeing an opportunity to showcase a hero from an unpopular war, the Defense Department announced to the American people Pat Tillman died while bravely facing down an ambush of Afghan militant forces. The convoy had split in two. Kevin's half went back to recover a broken-down Humvee. Pat's half moved through the canyons, trying to make a deadline set by the Pentagon. Suddenly, the first half is racing to the rear of the second. They're firing their weapons and shouting on the radio, so the second half dismounts to give fire support. That's when Pat was struck in the head. Narrowing his eyes on me, Captain Squall says,
"He died for his country."
I continue. Kevin flies out with Pat's body. He attends the funeral and is returning to duty when Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld decides to open an investigation into Pat's death. Nicholas says,
"It must have been difficult for Kevin."
The investigation turned up the same results the men on the ground already knew. What Kevin will discover when he returns to his unit. There was no ambush. Pat ran into position in those mountains to support his brother and that half of the convoy, but the Rangers that were shooting and screaming on the radio were shooting and screaming at shadows. Pat Tillman was killed by friendly fire.
"You're saying the Pentagon lied?"
asks Captain Squall. I'm not, but Kevin Tillman sure implied it. He testified before Congress with Jessica Lynch, who was another person we used as a poster child for military service. I shrug. In both cases, it's unclear whether they intentionally misled the public or were simply stumbling around in the fog of war. But Pat was an All-American square-jawed football star, and Jessica Lynch was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed beauty.
"That's the fundamental difference between you and me. You don't know how to qualify a hero."
Captain Squall takes a step to his left, and Chris appears beside him. Taking a long look at my brother, standing here in his uniform, unaware of the fate that awaits him, the urgency of what we're trying to do quickens my pulse.
"Take a good, hard look and tell me what you see."
My voice cracks. A young man with his whole life ahead of him?
This young man kicked down doors, not knowing what was on the other side. Could be nothing, could be certain death. He faced both with the same courage.
Captain Squall stands beside my brother.
"This young man is a hero."
Nicholas watches Chris with a wistful expression. He asks a question so quietly that I can't tell if he's speaking to me or to himself.
"What did so many give their lives to accomplish?"
An icy finger toys its way up my spine. You asked me that question before, I say. Nicholas seems confused, as though he hadn't realized his question was asked out loud.
"Did I?"
When we were in Ferdo's Square. You asked me what it meant to me to be there for that moment. With renewed interest, Nicholas says,
"You told me to ask the other men."
I take a moment before making my reply. I wanted you to see how Paige or Antelic would have answered. Captain Squall leans in and studies Chris's face.
If you could ask them, what do you think they might say?
He turns only his eyes as he awaits my response. I honestly don't know. That's the question I've struggled with for years. My personal sacrifice? How we all got here? What was done when things went right, and what was done when things went horribly wrong? Where things are today, with ISIS and all the other things threatening the region. Not to mention all the current saber-rattling that's happening these days, and the scary thought that a whole new generation will be asked to do the same thing so many before them have. I have no easy answer.
Then it's time for your test, Captain Squall says, removing his combat knife from its sheath. Let's see if you have that answer when the question is worded just so.